Hello, everybody. This is Casey Connor with Top Step Consulting. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on custom calculations. At this point, we are recording the webinar so we can post it online. And the chat window I have open, so if anybody has an issue, you can just use the Ready Talk chat, and we'll do what we can to help you out. Thank you again for joining us on this Valentine's Day here in the U.S. And we're going to go through today some tips and tricks around using custom calculations in OpenAir reporting. At the beginning here, I'll do the presentation. Everybody's lines are muted, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So if you have any questions along the way, just please jot them down, and we'll open it up. Hopefully we'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end of the webinar to take all your questions that you might have. Also on the line is Paul Reese with Top Step Consulting. He's going to help me out with this webinar, and so you'll hear from him as well. What we're going to cover today is quite a bit of detail, I guess, about how to use custom calculations in OpenAir because they can be extremely useful for extending the types of reporting you can do out of the system. So we're going to talk about how to use them and some of the key features, a couple of things around constants and how those can be used in reporting, as well as filters on the custom calculations that really can help get you more granular data than you can get out of some of the standard OpenAir fields. There's a relatively new feature around date filters in the custom calculations, and then a brand new feature from just a few weeks ago on some additional functionality around those date filters. We're going to talk about when it makes sense to use them in the system, some tips and tricks around organizing them and naming conventions and things like that that can be useful. As you start to use them, you'll probably find lots of uses. So you'll want to be careful about how you organize them. We'll talk about how to use them in reports, what that kind of looks like, and then we'll cover some other hints. Sorry, there's a question online about how to dial in. Okay. So how to create custom calculations in the system. They're available under Global Settings and just under the Reports module for custom calculations. There's a role setting that you must have in order to be able to set these up, and it's View and Modify Calculated Fields. We do recommend limiting how many people have access to this setting because otherwise you end up proliferating them and ending up with duplicates, and you lose some control around how they get used. One of the first features you'll probably be interested in with custom calculations are custom detail fields. Those are found in the custom calculations screen under a link called Custom Detail Fields. These have a couple of different uses in the system. They're useful in conjunction with other custom calculations or as values in custom calculations. And you can create other fields for reporting using them. So we're going to take a quick look at that. Okay, so here are your custom detail fields in the system. There are a couple different types. One is constants. These are often used as part of a custom calculation, which we'll get to in a minute. There are some nice functions with concatenation and taking differences, but the other one that we use most often is date diff. Now, a date diff custom detail field allows you to calculate literally the difference between any two date fields on an object. A good example of that that we often see is time to begin working. I'm just going to flip to another screen. So we created a custom detail field on the project object, and we said the first date is the first time entry date minus the created date of the project. So that literally will tell you how long it took you to begin working on the project from when it was created. And that value becomes an available value in reports. So those date diff values can be really neat for some of the reporting you want to do, sometimes around how long a project is, from start date to end date, just calculating various durations in the system. And there are lots of uses for that depending on how you use OpenAir. Some classic uses are for time entry, for utilization reporting, I should say. So you can create a constant time entry value of 1. Also, project billings, charges, and revenue are often useful. So you create a constant to use in a custom calculation. Generally, the constant is 1. And again, we'll show you in just a minute why those become useful. So here's an example. When you go to create a custom calculation, you can multiply or divide or add or subtract standard fields, for example, timesheets all hours, with a constant. So we're multiplying by 1. And you might ask, why would we want to multiply a value by 1? We just get the value. The reason that it's useful is below this on the screen, you have filters on the custom calculation form. And the filter will allow you to filter down the values or the results that you see here. So in this example, we have billable hours. So what we're going to do is take all of our timesheet hours times 1 and then filter on a task type we've set up called billable. What that does is gives you a reporting value called billable hours that will literally show you all the hours that have been entered against the task with the billable task type. So it's a great way to create columns in your reports to report off of different types of hours or, as we mentioned, charges or recognition values or anything like that. One thing to keep in mind when you're defining these custom calculations is you want to use the constants appropriately with the right types of values. In this case, you'll notice we have a time value multiplied by a time value. If we tried to multiply a time value, for example, by a charge, we're not going to get any results. So you have to be careful when you set these up. It'll let you do it wrong, but then you'll get no values on the reports. So here's an example of the filter on the custom calculation. You'll notice we have the same custom calculation here, timesheets all hours times a constant of 1. We've named it billable hours, but here's our filter. Beneath it on the screen, there's a task type called billable. So I'm going to flip back over to the application and show a different one. I like this one. So we've created a custom calculation here that's invoices, fees, minus timesheet, all actual cost. So we're calling that margin dollars. So in this case, we don't have any filters on the custom calculation. We literally want all the fees minus all the costs so we can get a margin. Then we can put this margin dollar value on a report and report off of our project margin as calculated by invoices minus the actual cost. Nice thing on custom calculations is we can use them in other custom calculations. So we can take this margin dollars. I've created a different custom calculation here, margin dollars divided by the fees. That gives us our margin percentage. So now we have 2 different reportable values. One is margin dollars, the way we want to calculate it. One is margin percentage, the way we want to calculate it. We can put both of those on summary reports or other reports to look at project by project how we calculate our margins. Very useful to be able to do that, particularly if you want to filter out certain types of hours or dollars using these filters on the report. Again, it's most commonly used probably with utilization reporting, where the standard calculation in the system, the standard utilization report, allows you to do a good calculation but only group it by user. Once you create this custom calculation, you can put it on a summary report and group it by any user-based or potentially project-based custom field that you would like. So if you want to do utilization by region or by user team or something like that, that becomes an option for you with these custom calculations. So you'll notice not only did we create combine a standard field and a constant. In the margin example, we combined our own custom calculation with another standard field to create a new calculation. Now I'm going to turn this over to Paul. And I believe I've just unmuted you, Paul. If you could speak up and let us know if you're here to talk through this functionality. Oh. Give me 1 second, I missed you.
All right,
okay,
can you hear me now?
Again, Paul? There you are.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
So I'm going to talk about date filters in custom calculations, and the reason that I'm going to talk about this is because I've actually spent a lot of time with this feature. One of the services that Top Step Consulting offers is a release management, is what we call it. And what we do is every time OpenAir releases a new release, they do about 4 to 6 a year. We go through and we turn everything on in our sandbox and we test it and we identify what are the limitations, what's the usefulness of the feature. We'll try to identify any potential defects that might be brand new to help OpenAir clear them up. And really we take all this information that we spend a whole weekend on, and we formulate this up so our customers who use the service, we say, here's what you should know about this feature and whether or not we recommend it. So I spent a lot of time with this particular feature. And I'm going to talk about what it was designed to do, what it does do, and some of the uses and some of the limitations. So here's the idea. Kind of think of it this way. The way that Casey just described filtering custom calculations on particular values, it's the same kind of thing, except rather than filtering on values, you're filtering on dates. So in the screenshot you're looking at here with these red arrows, you can see that if we have a custom calculation that includes any values from the invoices module, then it's going to filter those values based on the date filters defined here. In this case, it's using the invoice accounting date between last month and last month, which would be just all of last month. Or alternatively, we could filter on the invoice created date or the invoice date itself here. Okay, so that's basically in a nutshell what it does. The brand new feature that Casey mentioned that just came out a few weeks ago, if you can actually go back a slide, was the way that you define those date ranges. Now you can define, see where it says start metadate in the screenshot and end metadate? That's the new thing. So previously, if you wanted to find a date range, you had to pick an actual calendar date, like you see below under invoice created date. Now you've got more flexibility if you're using this feature to not be kind of stuck with calendar dates. You can use metadate. So as time goes by, you'll be reporting on the right period. So that's what that new feature does. That's also available in the reports module, by the way, not just custom calculations. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just to give you kind of an example of how you might want to think about using this feature, if you wanted to show a report, in the same report you wanted to report on invoicing inception to date, so the dawn of time through today, invoicing, and then also in the same report, just show me of that, how much of that was last month. This is how you could do that. Another possible use is if you wanted to do the same kind of thing with timesheets. If you wanted to say how many timesheet hours have been worked for this month, and then also in the same report for the full year. Okay, so we'll get into an example actually next. But Casey, if you can flip back to that last slide. Great, under how it works. First of all, you have to enable an internal switch. That's the rule of thumb, right? With a feature, if you can't find it in OpenAir, it's probably because it's controlled by an internal switch, so you'd have to reach out to OpenAir support and have them turn this on for you. Once it's enabled, you go to any custom calculation and add a date range filter. But here's kind of some of the limitations. The date range is superseded by the report date range. So that's kind of a confusing way to say this. So I'll try it in a couple other ways until it makes sense. If you have your custom calculation that is filtered by a particular date range, that date range, let's say monthly, that date range has to fit within the reporting date range on your report to be able to show it properly. So if your custom calculation is a monthly filter, but your report is a weekly filter, then your custom calculation is going to be basically cropped by the report date range, which is weekly because it's smaller. So it doesn't have the ability to say within one column, show me the monthly value, and then separately show me the weekly value within one column. The report date range, or the column width, if you will, is what controls what data shows up. I'll show you an example in the next slide. A couple other quick things to point out. Only container level records can be filtered. So by container level, I'm talking about a timesheet. You can filter by timesheet dates, timesheet start date, timesheet created date. But you cannot filter on time entry date. Same with expenses. You can filter on expense report date, but not receipt date. And then also two other important limitations. A lot of people ask me this, can you do this for booking dates? A lot of people want to do bookings reports with this, and unfortunately bookings and purchases values are not yet available. So I'm still crossing my fingers on that, but not so far. So let's take a look at an example of what this looks like. If we go to the next slide here. Okay, so here's an example of where I want to show revenue inception to date within a monthly report. Now, the top screenshot there is showing just the actual revenue transactions. You can see I've got one in February and two in April. But including January, there's a total of $100,000 on this project that's been recognized. Now in the report, what I've done is I have a custom calculation called Projects Recognized Revenue ITD. I was thinking that if I could show the inception to date revenue in a monthly report, again, that was my goal. But here's what happens in that bottom screen. You can see that the ITD value is kind of cropped. It only shows the portion of that ITD value that pertains to February. So you can see the monthly February recognized revenue is $36,000. That's the same as the ITD that it's reporting because the ITD value is kind of cropped by the monthly definition of the report. Same thing in April. So if you look at the report, you might be thinking, the ITD revenue for this project is $70,000, but if you look at the project above, you see, we're not actually including January's revenue. So it's not a true inception to date value in the report because it's been sort of cropped, if you will. So this is kind of one of the gotchas to be aware of if you want to use this feature. Let's take a look at the next example. So this is similar but a little bit different where we're trying to mix months and weeks. So in the top you can see that I've got different daily values for recognition, so $2,000 a day for a period of time, and that spans 2 weeks. So in my report, I've got just the regular projects recognized revenue value, but then I've got a custom calculation that's filtered on last month. And by the way, if you want to use this, you have to add, I've named that custom calculation recognized revenue last month. I had to add the last month just so I kind of can tell what it is I'm reporting on. It won't add that for you. So you can see in the week of 6/10, it says the last month's value is $8,000, which is also the same value of the week. And in the week of 6/17, it says the last month's value was $12,000. So it's not really showing you the full monthly value because, again, it's cropped by the weekly definition of the report. So the reason I point out these examples is because it's very tempting to want to use this feature and say, oh, great, I can combine inception to date values and last month's value all in one report. And it's true that you can, but you've got to be really careful and deliberate about planning this out, making sure that your report date definition is much bigger than the custom calculation date definition. The custom calculation date range has to fit within the report date range. So here's what I would say, just as a rule of thumb. Use a really big report like a yearly report or an inception to date report. Report on one period. And then include a custom calculation that's filtered by a much smaller date range within that report date range. Then it'll work just fine. And I think, do we have one more slide, or was that the last slide on this? I don't actually remember, Casey. I think that might be it. So
that was it, and go ahead.
So here's what I would leave you with. I'm actually curious if anyone is using this, and if so, what types of reports you've gotten value out of. I would love to hear that, or if you want to go on the LinkedIn user group, the OpenAir user group, and post your thoughts there. I'm always looking for new ways to get value out of this. This is just one of those areas where you want to just be really careful and thoughtful about planning ahead and making sure that it's actually going to work the way you want to or expect it to. So that's it.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Sure.
I've pulled up a report here where those values can be useful. And to add to what Paul said, keeping the report date range wide is absolutely the right way to go about it. Also, you can develop reports where the only values you use on the report are your custom values with the date ranges. So you can leave your report value wide, but then have your custom values be the only values that you're really reporting. And that way you have a little more control over exactly what you want to show in the report. So in this report, for example, you'll see that the billing, or the report date is inception through the end of the year. But we've created custom calculations for last month and last quarter. It's fairly common desire in OpenAir that can be difficult to achieve, to show quarters and months on the same report. So this is one way you might be able to get there. So you'll see that we have last month's billing as well as last quarter's billing. Of course, they're the same for this client. Here's a better example on the same report. So something to keep in mind as you're trying to do that type of reporting. These date ranges can be very useful, but again, back to what Paul said, be really careful with how you want to use them. So you might be asking, why would we use these again? I get it. I see there's some functionality here, but what are some common uses for it? It creates a ton of flexibility relative to the standard OpenAir reporting, and gives you a lot of different values you can put on reports. So here are some typical ones. We showed you billable hours, also billable user costs. Project expenses. So if you want to kind of group expenses together, by different expense types or categories or such. Any real task type based hours. So if you have task types defined on your tasks, you can group those together, similar to how we did the billable hours, and show them on your report. A common report request is, I want to see an analysis of the hours across my organization. What did I spend on billable versus internal versus PTO? As long as you use task types or some other time reportable field, then you can create custom calculations to group those as columns on your reports. So really powerful for that kind of thing. Also, you can combine them, as we showed before, and you can get creative with that. So we talked about doing project margin and project margin percentages. You can also do client. And of course, billable utilization, as well as the percentage. So you can get a better view into your organization by creating these custom calcs. So when do you want to use them? We don't want to, we don't want to define hundreds of these necessarily across an organization to get every single value. There's a lot delivered with the system. So when you want to combine values for reporting, it's a good rule of thumb. When you want to create new rows on your report, so kind of new summaries, that's what summary reports are good for, and you can add summary values to your summary reports to do that. Custom calculations are not going to do that for you. You want to think of custom calculations as new columns in your report. So I want to show a column with billable hours or utilization percent or project margin. And I don't want to use a delivered field to do that. So some more examples of custom calculations that we've created. You'll see several categories of task type-based reports here. So you'll notice that the calculation is the same each time. Timesheet approved hours, you could use worked or you could use whatever other value you wanted here, times the time entry constant of 1. The difference between these calculations is the filters. So each one of these has a filter based on the task type to show, to group the hours together for those task types. Then accordingly, I've used each of those custom calculations in a new one to calculate the percentage of time spent on each of those things. So I take the customer utilized hours and I divide by the base work schedule hours to find out what percentage of their work schedule they're spending on customer utilized work. Another couple of places where these often come in handy are for calculating average bill rates. And there are lots of ways you might want to do that. But a common one is to say, what's my average bill rate for T&M? Which is going to be hours from charges divided by the invoice amounts. You could also do milestone. If you want to calculate or just fixed fee, if you want to calculate the average bill rate across your organization, you can do that as well. Really handy for that. A few tips on organizing these. So I can see everybody flipping over and starting to create a lot of custom calculations. I imagine that it's easy to define uses for these. So we usually want to create some kind of a naming convention, which we'll come to in a minute. I like to modify the view, the list view in the system for my custom calculations so that I can see all the fields I want to on one form. By default, OpenAir does not show you the operation on the screen. You have to move it over. I also like to have the module and type, so I can always see the resulting values here of the custom calculations. It just makes it a lot easier to glance down the list and see how everything's has been set up as you're building or troubleshooting reports. Again, standard naming convention, strongly recommended so that when you're searching for them, they're easy to find. There's an option when you're creating a calculation to either let or do not let the system add the module name. So in this case, we're looking at our hours customer utilized calculation. If I uncheck this box, then the system is going to prepend the module name to the field. So it's actually going to be called timesheets-hours customer utilized. That can be nice if you want to group everything by OpenAir's standard module names. So when you go to a summary report, you'll see your standard fields, such as timesheets all hours, timesheets approved hours, as well as your custom calculations like this. It would be called timesheets hours customer utilized. My personal preference is I like to control the name. So I usually click that box, and I like to group all my hours calculations together, all my percentage calculations together. I might call it margin or expenses or whatever something that leads me to know what the custom calculation is for. Another hint on how to find them and identify the custom calculations and reports. You may have noticed when you're creating a summary report, if you point at a standard value, and this example is timesheets all hours, you get a little pop-up that defines what goes into that field and what date filters can be used on that field. When you are looking at a custom calculation, you point at it and there's no pop-up. So it's a really shortcut way to identify the fields in your reports that are custom. So that's just a quick hint as you're developing your reports and troubleshooting them. Just remember that. If you see a pop-up, it's a standard field. This is similar to the issue with the date range filters, but this is regarding the data filters on the custom calculations. In this example, the hours customer utilized, on the custom calculation itself, if you remember, is timesheets all hours times a constant. and then it's filtered on a task type of customer utilized. I added this field to a report. Then I added a task type filter on the report to say internal not utilized. Well, you would expect that maybe the report filter would win, right? And that I wouldn't get any values here. But when I run the report this way, I actually do get the customer utilized hours on the report. So as you're building reports using filtered custom calculations, be really careful because you might not get the results you expect. You might get either more data than you want or less data than you want, depending on how you've set up the filters. So just remember that when you've filtered your custom calculations, you want to be really careful how you filter the reports so that you get the values that you're expecting. It's a really common issue to run into to get unexpected results. And I see several of our clients on the line where we've run into this. So just keep that in mind and as you're troubleshooting or not getting results that you expect. One drawback is that you can't filter based on task. So when you look at the custom calculation form and look at the filters, if you look through this list, you'll see that there is no filter on task. So it's a common assumption to think, oh, great, I can filter them based on my PTO task, so I can report on my PTO hours. It's not going to work for you that way. You're going to need to identify a task type or some other task level field if you wanted to filter on PTO as an example. So keep that in mind. It's something that we're all crossing our fingers that we can do someday. Another hint is sometimes when you're creating lots of custom calculations, particularly if you're using date ranges, your names might get kind of long. This works in other places in OpenAir too, when you're naming fields. But if you put a BR, that's an HTML tag, when you actually run the report, you'll see that there will be a line break. This will keep your columns from getting too wide on your reports. Now, if you try this and it doesn't work, there's an internal switch that you need to request from OpenAir around your HTML security settings. There are several options with that, which we can share with you another time, but you basically tell OpenAir which security level you want, and it'll allow you to use HTML tags in your field name. This works on custom calculation names, as well as if you want to use, for example, you can use drop-down fields with HTML tags for colors. Classic is red, yellow, green for a project status. And you could actually have them show up as red, yellow, and green on a report. So that's kind of a quick overview of custom calculations and some of their uses in the system. And wanted to, first I want to see, Paul, if there's anything you'd like to add to this before we open it up for questions.
No, I'm good. I think you covered everything important. There's always little hidden things that you discover.
The conference has been unmuted.
But I think you've definitely given a great overview.
Well, thanks for your help too. And there was one question on the chat that I want to come back to, and Paul, this might be appropriate for you to handle. What about limitations in the metadata ranges and custom calc filtering as you nest them? So I'm not sure if that makes sense or if you need some clarification on that. And I've unmuted everybody, so Mike, if you want to add to that.
So this is Mike, and the main thing with the metadata ranges is it's very limited in working with your own internal custom date ranges. So if your financial periods aren't compatible with what you want to report on, then you can't use the metadata ranges. If you have custom date ranges, then you can't apply those custom date ranges to the meta values either. It's just pretty much strictly meta calendar date ranges and your financial period ranges, and you can't create overlapping financial period ranges. So you're stuck with, if your financial periods are quarters, then that's the only metadata range you can use is quarters.
Yeah, that's true.
Got it.
That's a good point.
That makes sense. Yep. Thanks. Are there any other questions on the line? Well, if we're going to stay on for another minute, but while we're waiting for questions, a couple things I want to point you to is on our website. We've done quite a few of these webinars over the last several years.
So you can always go to Top Step Consulting and go find the webinars, the expert webinar series. You'll see lots of webinars up there that you can view. So webinars just like this, they typically last about 45 minutes and give you a really good kind of dive into some functionality. So that's free, available to the community. You might want to scroll through those if there are other areas where you have interest. In addition, Paul mentioned the release management. So if you want more details on that, a lot of our customers, we don't want to pitch too much here, but our customers really like this because it keeps them up to date on what's available and what they can accomplish with OpenAir using all the new features that come out. And we can help you avoid some pitfalls of some of it because we really test them pretty well before we recommend them.